Built that porch with my own two hands in 1987. Cedar planks. I drove down to Bryson City to pick out myself, every nail set by hand because my wife Margaret hated the look of staples. 40 years I lived in that house on Ridgeway Lane, and the day my son drove up the gravel with a U-Haul behind his Lexus, I thought he'd come to help me clean out the basement. I was 71 years old. I just finished chemo 6 weeks before. My hair was coming back in patches and I still couldn't taste coffee right. He stood on that porch with a manila folder under his arm and told me he needed to talk about asset protection. That word, asset protection. I should have known right then. My name's Hollis Crayford. I was a high school shop teacher in Buncombe County, North Carolina for 34 years. Margaret passed in 2014 from a stroke that came on so fast, she didn't even have time to set down her coffee cup. We had one son. Just the one. His name's Brett, and what I'm about to tell you is the story of how my own boy tried to bury me alive while I was still breathing. Back in the spring of 2017, I got the diagnosis. Stage 2 prostate cancer. The doctor at Mission Hospital said the odds were good, but there'd be surgery, then radiation, then a whole lot of waiting. Brett came down from Charlotte the day after I told him. Brought his wife, Camille. She was a real estate attorney, the kind who wore heels in my driveway and looked at the moss on my walkway like it had personally offended her. They sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Margaret used to roll out biscuits, and Camille slid that manila folder across to me. "Dad," Brett said. He'd never called me Dad before that day, always Pop since he was a boy. "Dad, with the medical bills coming and the unpredictability of treatment, we need to make sure the house and your savings are protected. Medicaid look-back, estate planning. You don't want the hospital to take everything, do you?" I was tired. My back hurt from the biopsy. I trusted my son. I signed. What I signed, I found out years later, was a quitclaim deed transferring the property at 1247 Ridgeway Lane into a revocable trust with my son as sole trustee and Camille as successor trustee. I signed a financial power of attorney. I signed authorizations for them to handle my brokerage account at Edward Jones, the one Margaret and I had built up to about $312,000 over 40 years of teaching salaries and skipping vacations. Brett told me it was all reversible. He said he was just holding it for me until I was through the worst of it. He said when I was healthy again, we'd put everything back the way it was. I believed him because he was my son. I had no reason in this world not to. Surgery went fine. Radiation was the hard part. There were days I couldn't get up the stairs to my own bedroom, so I slept on the couch in the den. Brett called maybe twice a week at the start, then once a week. Then it got to where I'd see his name on the answering machine and not on the phone at all. Camille never called. Camille never called. She came once in August of 2017 with a clipboard and a man in a polo shirt I didn't know. She said he was an appraiser. I asked what for. She said for tax purposes. I was 3 days off a radiation session and I couldn't think straight. October 2017, the letter came. Certified mail. I had to walk down to the end of the driveway in my slippers to sign for it. It was an eviction notice. From my own son. Citing the trust agreement, citing his authority as trustee, giving me 30 days to vacate the property at 1247 Ridgeway Lane on the grounds that, and I'll never forget this phrase, the trustee has determined that the beneficiary's continued occupancy is incompatible with the long-term preservation of trust assets. I stood at the end of my own driveway in my slippers holding that letter, and I started laughing. Not a happy laugh. The kind of laugh you do when your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are reading. I called Brett. He didn't pick up. I called him again. Voicemail. I drove 40 minutes to a payphone outside of Citgo because I didn't trust my home phone anymore. I felt like a crazy person, but I did it. And I called from there and Camille picked up. She told me in that calm, flat voice of hers that this wasn't personal, that I was no longer capable of maintaining the property safely and that they'd arranged a comfortable placement for me at a facility called Whispering Oaks in Hendersonville. I drove home, sat on my porch, watched the dogwood Margaret planted in 90U dropping leaves in the yard, and I made a decision that probably saved my life. I called Margaret's brother Ned, 81 years old at the time, retired tax accountant, a man who had not once in his life thrown away a piece of paper. Ned drove down from Old Fort that same evening. He looked at the documents. He looked at the eviction letter. He sat in my kitchen for 2 hours. Then he said very quietly, "Hollis, you've been robbed, and we're not going to tell anyone we know it yet. That's the part I want you to understand." Ned didn't tell me to call a lawyer. Not yet. He didn't tell me to fight. He told me to let them think they'd won. So I went to Whispering Oaks, $6,800 a month, paid out of my trust. A semi-private room with a man named Earl who had advanced Parkinson's. Linoleum floors. A view of the parking lot. 3 meals a day on a plastic tray. I told the staff I had memory issues. I let them think I couldn't manage my pills. I shuffled when I walked. I let Brett come visit me twice, and I called him son, like I was confused about it. He left both times looking relieved. Meanwhile, Ned was working. Ned had every original document Margaret and I had ever generated. The deed from 1985 in our names, free and clear. The brokerage statements going back to 1991. Margaret's will, which named me as sole beneficiary and which had a provision, Margaret had insisted on it, God bless her, that any property passed to me was to remain mine in fee simple, separate from any future trust or marital arrangement until my death, at which point it passed directly to any blood descendant who has shown active care and concern for my husband in his final years. Margaret put that in there because of a fight she'd had with Brett in 2011 about him not visiting when she had pneumonia. She'd told me about it. I hadn't thought it mattered. Ned hired an estate attorney out of Ashfield named Mr. Pemberton, paid him a retainer out of his own pocket, and instructed him to do nothing visible. No filings, no letters. Just gather, investigate, wait. Mr. Pemberton found things. He found that the trust Brett created in 2017 was filed by Camille's law firm and that Camille had not disclosed the conflict of interest. He found that the appraisal in August 2017 had valued the house at $312,000 and that Brett had then borrowed $240,000 against it through a home equity line, money that did not appear in any account belonging to the trust or to me. He found that my brokerage account had been liquidated in stages between January and June of 2018, with the proceeds wired to an LLC in Delaware called Sunridge Holdings, registered to Camille's sister. He found, in other words, that my son and his wife had stolen approximately $550,000 from a man recovering from cancer. And here's what Ned told me the day he came to Whispering Oaks with Mr. Town, Pemberton, in early 2019. By then I'd been there 16 months and I'd lost 22 pounds. Ned said, "Hollis, we have enough to put them in prison. But if we move now, they'll lawyer up, they'll burn evidence, and they'll drag this out for 10 years. I want to wait until they get greedy enough to make a mistake we can't lose with." I asked him how long. He said, "However long it takes." I want to tell you something here. Sitting in that nursing home, knowing what I knew, watching my own son drive away after his quarterly visits, there were nights I prayed to die just so I wouldn't have to feel it anymore. There were nights I thought about walking out into traffic on Highway 25. The only thing that kept me going was a kid named Wendell. Wendell was the orderly on my floor. 24 years old, from Silva, putting himself through nursing school at AB Tech. He brought me real coffee in a thermos every Tuesday and Thursday because he saw me wincing at the instant they served us. He sat with me on his break some nights, and we talked about woodworking. I taught his cousin shop class 20 years before, turned out, and Wendell had grown up hearing about Mr. Crayford, who could turn a chair leg on a lathe. He didn't know I had any money. He didn't know about Brett. He was just a young man being kind to an old one because that's how he was raised. I'm telling you about Wendell because he matters later. He matters a lot. 5.5 years went by. 5.5 years in that place. I had cataract surgery. I had a hip replacement. I read every Louis L'Amour novel they had in the day room and started over. Brett visited at Christmas and on my birthday and never any other time. Camille came once. They sold my truck. They sold Margaret's piano. They sold the cedar chest my own father built me in 1948. I knew because Wendell saw the listings on a marketplace app and showed me one night, very quietly, in the empty cafeteria. But here's what they didn't know. Ned had been in that house. Ned had been in that house twice, with the spare key I'd given him in 1996, before they changed the locks. The first time, in November 2017, 3 days after I'd been moved out, Ned took every original document out of my filing cabinet in the basement. Deeds, wills, Margaret's medical records, the the brokerage account, opening papers from 1981, the handwritten letter Brett had written me in college, asking for forgiveness for stealing $800 from us, a letter Margaret had insisted we keep, in case we ever need to remember who he is. The second time, in January 2018, Ned took something else, something I'd forgotten existed. Margaret kept a journal. She kept it on the top shelf of the linen closet behind the spare quilts, in a green cloth-bound book. She'd written in it most nights for the last 12 years of her life, and in March of 2014. 2 months before she died, Margaret had written 4 pages about a conversation she'd had with Brett at Easter dinner, about him asking, casually, whether the house was in both their names or just hers, about her telling him to never ever plan around her death or mine, about the look he gave her when she said it. She'd written, I do not trust my son with my husband when I am gone. I have told Hollis, but he does not want to hear it. I am writing this so that someone to hear it. I am writing this so that someone, someday, will know I saw what I saw. Margaret, my Margaret, reaching across 9 years of dirt to save me. The mistake came in January of 2023. Brett's real estate development company in Charlotte went under. Camille's firm dropped her over an ethics inquiry related to another elderly client. Turned out I wasn't the only one. Sunridge Holdings was already empty. The money was gone, mostly into a condo in Boca Raton and a boat called Liquidity. They were broke and they panicked. So Brett petitioned the court, through a new lawyer, since Camille couldn't do it, to have me declared permanently incompetent and to have the trust converted to an irrevocable form with himself as the named beneficiary upon my passing. He also petitioned to have the remaining trust assets, meaning the house, which they hadn't sold yet because the equity line was underwater, transferred outright to him as compensation for caregiver services rendered. That was the move Ned had been waiting for. Mr. Stechtine, Pemberton filed the response within 72 hours. He filed the motion to remove the trustee for breach of fiduciary duty, a counterpetition to void the original trust on grounds of fraud and undue influence, a complaint with the North Carolina State Bar against Camille, and a referral to the Buncombe County District Attorney's Office for elder financial abuse, which under North Carolina law is a Class F felony. The hearing was set for August 14, 2023. I want to tell you what it was like the morning of that hearing. Wendell drove me. He'd taken the day off from his nursing job. By then he graduated and was working at Mission, and he wore a suit he'd bought at Belk for the occasion. I wore the navy blue suit Margaret had bought me for our 40th anniversary. It hung off me. I'd lost so much weight in the home I had to use a belt I'd punched extra holes in with an awl. Brett was there with his lawyer. Camille was there too, sitting in the gallery in a cream-colored blazer like she was at a country club brunch. They looked at me when I walked in, and I could see them assessing, trying to figure out if I knew, if I was still the confused old man they'd put away. I sat down at the petitioner's table. Mr. Pemberton on my right, Ned in the gallery directly behind me. Margaret's brother, 86 years old, shaking a little, but sitting straight as a fence post. The judge was a woman named Whitfield. She'd been on the bench 22 years. She was not known for patience. Brett's lawyer went first. He talked about my diminished capacity, my inability to manage daily affairs, the burden my care had placed on my devoted son. He read excerpts from Whispering Oaks' records that, I'll point out, had been written based on the persona Ned and I had agreed I would project for as long as it took. Then Mr. Pemberton stood up, and he didn't argue, not at first. He asked the judge for permission to introduce a series of exhibits. The judge nodded. Exhibit 1, the original deed to 1247 Ridgeway Lane in the names of Hollis and Margaret Crayford, dated July 1985, with no encumbrances. Exhibit 2, Margaret's last will and testament, including the provision regarding blood descendants and active care. Exhibit 3, bank records showing the home equity withdrawal and the wire transfers to Sunridge Holdings. Exhibit 4, the Delaware corporate filing for Sunridge Holdings, identifying Camille's sister as the registered agent. Exhibit 5, Camille's law firm's billing records, obtained through subpoena, showing she had personally drafted the trust documents while representing me as a fiduciary client, a direct conflict of interest. Exhibit 6, the affidavit of Dr. Torm, Lenora Ashby, an independent geriatric psychiatrist who had evaluated me 3 weeks before the hearing at Ned's arrangement and who certified that I was, and I'll quote, of sound mind, fully oriented, and capable of managing his own legal and financial affairs without assistance. Exhibit 7 was the green cloth-bound journal. Mr. Pemberton handed it to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. Judge Whitfield turned to the page Mr. Pemberton had marked. She read it. She read it again. She looked up at Brett. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him. Exhibit 8 was Wendell. Wendell took the stand and testified, under oath, that for 5.5 years he had observed Mr. Hollis Crayford as a resident of Whispering Oaks. That Mr. Crayford had been admitted under representations of diminished capacity that did not match Wendell's professional observations. That Mr. Crayford had never received personal funds from his son, never received birthday cards, never been taken to a single doctor's appointment by family. That Mr. Crayford had been visited approximately 14 times in 5.5 years. He looked at Brett when he said that last part. Wendell did. I want you to know that. A 29-year-old nurse looked across that courtroom at a 51-year-old developer in a gray suit and held his gaze until Brett looked at the table. Exhibit 9 was the letter. The college letter. Brett, at 19 years old, asking forgiveness for stealing from his own parents. In his own handwriting, the judge called a recess, 40 minutes. Brett's lawyer asked for a meeting in chambers. They came out 20 minutes later, and Brett's lawyer's face was the color of cement. When court resumed, Judge Whitfield did several things. She voided the trust ab initio, meaning as if it had never existed. She ordered the immediate restoration of the property and any recoverable assets to my sole ownership. She referred the matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. She referred Camille to the state bar for disbarment proceedings. She ordered Brett to pay my legal fees, which by that point exceeded $90,000. And she looked at my son and she said, on the record, Mr. Mamberall, Crayford, in 22 years on this bench, I have rarely encountered a more deliberate and sustained betrayal of an elderly parent. The court hopes you understand the gravity of what you have done. The court suspects you do not. Brett was indicted 6 weeks later. So was Camille. So was Camille's sister. So, eventually, was the appraiser from August 2017 who turned out to have falsified valuations for at least 4 other elderly homeowners in the Charlotte area as part of an organized scheme. 2 officers in the Buncombe County Sheriff's Department who had been peripherally involved in approving my voluntary placement at Whispering Oaks were investigated, and 1 was forced into early retirement. The Whispering Oaks facility itself was put under state review, and 3 administrators lost their licenses. Brett pled out and got 6 years in federal prison. He'll be 60 when he's released. Camille got 4 years and was permanently disbarred. The condo in Boca Raton was seized. The boat was seized. About $190,000 of my original $312 was recovered. The house was returned to me free and clear, though they'd let it go to hell. The porch I'd built was rotting in 3 places, and there was black mold in the basement. I came home in October of 2023. Now here's the part nobody asks me about, but I want to tell you anyway, because if you're watching this and you've been hurt by your own family, this is the part that matters. I had a granddaughter. Brett and Camille's only child. Her name's Joelle. She was 16 when they put me in that home and 22 when I came out. I hadn't seen her in 5.5 years. Brett had told her I was too sick for visitors, that I didn't recognize people anymore, that it would only upset us both. She believed him, the way I had believed him. She was a kid. The week after I moved back into the house, I got a letter. Handwritten. 3 pages. Joelle had been at the courthouse the day of the hearing. She'd snuck in, sat in the back. She'd heard everything. She wrote that she was sorry. She wrote that she was sorry. She wrote that she didn't know. She wrote that she'd cut off contact with her mother and was going to testify against her father at sentencing if it would help. I wrote her back and told her not to. I told her she didn't owe me her childhood, and she didn't owe me her childhood, and she didn't owe the court her father. I told her if she ever wanted to come up to Ridgeway Lane and sit on the porch, once I'd fixed it, she'd be welcome. That was 1.5 years ago. She comes up most weekends now. She's 24. She's finishing a degree in social work at UNC Asheville, specifically focused on elder advocacy. She says she's going to spend her career making sure what happened to me happens to fewer people. She calls me Pop, same as Brett used to. I rewrote my will last spring. The house, when I'm gone, goes to Joel. The remainder of the recovered assets, about $140,000 after legal fees and repairs, I split three ways. A third to Joel, a third to Ned, who at 88 is the only reason I'm not in a pauper's grave, and a third to Wendell, who I made co-trustee of a small foundation we set up together. We call it the Margaret Crayford Fund. It pays for independent legal review for elderly residents of long-term care facilities in western North Carolina who suspect financial abuse by family members. Last count, we've helped 17 people. 3 of them got out. 3 of them are home. Brett writes me from the federal facility in Butner. He's written 11 times. I haven't opened any of them. I keep them in a shoebox in the closet. Maybe someday I will. Probably I won't. He took 5.5 years from me. He took my wife's piano and my father's chest and my Tuesday afternoons in the workshop. He took the version of myself that trusted his own boy. I'm 79 years old now. I don't know how many years I have left, but the ones I have, I'm spending on this porch with a granddaughter who came back and a brother-in-law who wouldn't let me die quiet, and a young man from Silva who poured coffee for a stranger. People ask me sometimes if I forgive him. My son. They ask like there's a right answer. What I tell them is this. Forgiveness is between Brett and whatever God he prays to in that prison. It's not my job. My job was to survive him. My job was to walk out of that home with my mind intact and my name back. My job was to make sure no one ever again looked at my granddaughter and said, "Your grandfather went crazy and we had to put him away." I did my job. And I'll tell you one more thing. The morning after the hearing, before I moved back into the house, there was still mold remediation to do. The place wasn't livable yet. Wendell drove me out to Margaret's grave at the cemetery in Black Mountain. I hadn't been there in 5.5 years. Couldn't get out to visit. I stood at her stone and I told her everything. I told her about the journal. I told her about Joelle. I told her she'd save me from beyond the grave with 4 pages and a green book. The wind picked up. Not in any spooky way, just a regular October wind in the Blue Ridge. But I felt her. I did. I felt her one more time, the way I hadn't felt her in nearly a decade. Then I drove home with Wendell, and we got cheeseburgers at a place outside Old Fort, and I paid because, for the first time in 5.5 years, I had my own wallet with my own money in it. That's the story. That's all of it. If you're young and you're listening to this, take care of your old people. Take care of them even when it's inconvenient. Visit them. Read their mail with them. Ask questions about the papers they're being asked to sign. Don't assume the family member showing up with the manila folder has anyone's interest at heart but his own. And if you're old, like me, and you're listening, keep your originals. Keep them somewhere only one person you trust completely knows about. Tell that person the whole truth. Write things down. Date them. Sign them. The piece of paper you forget about today might be the piece of paper that brings you home 5 years from now. My name is Hollis Crayford. I lived. They didn't get me. That's the only ending that matters. I've had 2 years now to sit on this porch and think about how it all happened. 2 years to ask myself the question that won't quite leave me alone. Not, why did Brett do it? I gave up on that one a long time ago. The question that stays with me is, what could I have done differently before any of it started? And the answer I keep coming back to is uncomfortable, because it points right back at me. I taught Brett, by the way I lived, that I would always trust him. Always. No matter what. I never once said no to him as a boy in any way that stuck. When he stole that $800 in college, Margaret wanted to make him work it off. I overruled her. I told her boys make mistakes. I told her love covers a multitude of sins. What I really did was teach my son that the worst thing he could do to his father was something his father would forgive without consequence. That's not love. That's not mercy. That's a slow leak in the foundation of a person's character. And it took 30 years for the house to fall. Cause and effect. That's the only law I know that never gets repealed. The trust I gave Brett without conditions became the trust he weaponized against me. The signature I put on a manila folder without reading became the chain around my ankle for 5.5 years. Every choice has a tale behind it, and the tale is longer than you think. But here's the other side of that same coin, and this is the part I want you to take with you. Margaret writing in that green journal in 2014. She didn't know I'd ever read those pages. She wrote them anyway. Ned keeping every original document for 40 years, he didn't know they'd ever matter. He kept them anyway. Wendell pouring real coffee for an old man on a Tuesday he didn't know I had a cent to my name. He did it anyway. Cause and effect runs both directions. The small decencies you commit when no one's watching are seeds. They grow in soil you can't see. And one day, when the worst thing in your life is happening to you, those seeds are the only thing standing between you and the dark. I'm not a clever man. I never was. I taught teenagers how to use a bandsaw for 34 years. But I learned 3 things in that nursing home that I want to leave with you. The first is that being good is not the same as being smart, and you owe the people you love both. Love them with your heart, but protect them with your head. The second is that endurance is not loud. The 5.5 years I spent shuffling through linoleum hallways pretending to forget my own name, that wasn't weakness. That was the longest, hardest fight of my life, and nobody ever saw it. The work that saves you usually isn't the work anyone applauds. The third is that the worst people in your life will tell you their plans early. They'll show you who they are. Believe them the first time. Margaret saw bread at that Easter dinner in 2011, and she wrote it down. I should have listened. I didn't. I do now. I'm 79. I have however long I have. Sit on your porch. Keep your originals. Tell the truth to one person who dig you out of a grave with their bare hands. That's enough.